Yes, indeed. And we're so happy to be here and happy to have all of you all with us. So I'm Casey and you all just heard Mathieu, and we are co-hosting this real world asset tokenization conversation this afternoon. So this is Matt as CEO for Magma and me, Casey, as co-founder of Logion. So Magma and Logion are co-hosting this very special event. So real world asset tokenization conversation is on today, live, but it is also going to be recurrent, as we say in French, a rendezvous, and an international rendezvous at that, because what we are aiming at is building and furthering and enhancing understanding and knowledge with regard to tokenization internationally. So because this is the conversation, you all obviously have a chat, and please feel free to ask all your questions and share your insights in the chat. We have both Emery and Stéphane that are looking at your questions and that can answer some of them and that can bring to Matt's or my attention any question that is valid to be put on air and that you would like to put to the speakers. So we have a very ambitious agenda, I would like to say, and we saw that when we were preparing it with all the speakers, because there is so much to say and we so much want to delve really deep into many different aspects of tokenization. But we must bear in mind that, first of all, this is a new topic and it is rapidly evolving. And of course, we have our time constraints for this afternoon. And because we have a fabulous list of speakers that I will shortly introduce, that we have to keep to a certain constraint. So please be patient if we don't treat everything today, but that's okay because it's going to be recurrent. We can get back to these subjects from different angles and approaches in upcoming conversations.
And you have a little button on the screen that says Q&R, and it's for you to ask questions. So you can click on that and ask questions. And if we don't answer today, we will send you an email or we will respond on the event LinkedIn.
Right. Okay, so without further ado, I will just indicate how the agenda is going to work and introduce our speakers. So we're starting off right after with a first session of 45 minutes with Michael Clark, and we are speaking about the new paradigm of the data economy. This is very essential that we get a holistic view of this new paradigm. We must not forget that a token is just a number in a ledger that's symbolizing value, and we will see how Michael will also show how tokenization is just a derivative of this new paradigm. So Michael Clark, we are thrilled to have you. Michael is a data scholar. He's an author of an upcoming book that he will speak about and an emerite expert in payment and open banking. So after this 45-minute session, we will then dive deep into a series of sessions with just as great experts. We will first go into the tokenization of financial assets, and this will be with Anton Golub from SwissAssetDAO. Many of you all follow Anton on LinkedIn, and we also have Liam Cowan, who is head of business development at Tokeny. So after that 25-minute session, we will go straight into real estate tokenization. And this will be with Denis Petrokic, who is the CEO of Blocksquare, and also with Mathieu himself, CEO of Magma. So then again, we have a 25-minute session. And then after that, we will go into the issue of the tech stack, the ecosystem, and the community around that can be dedicated to tokenization and real estate tokenization with 𝐀𝐆𝐄𝐍𝐃𝐀, who is Partnership and Adoption Director of XRPL Commons. And then we will finish with myself. I will be speaking about legal certification around the token and how we can embed rights and obligations so that they can move with the token through the Logion protocol. And we will finish with an overview both towards the current and future trends of this tokenization market. So over to you, Matt, and here we go.
Okay, so let me give you a little introduction. So yes, in order to understand what is happening, I think we need to have a bird's eye view. So the digitization is integrating all realms of the human environment at a record pace, and almost everything is becoming computable, meaning information in database that can be computed and analytics for decision making. As we evolve in a digital world, a universal computational field is being created where generative AI and advanced computation will be applied. Over the ages, the economy has gone through cycles of transformation, and the way commerce was handled has changed many times during industrial revolutions. What is coming is the fourth industrial revolution, a digital era where advanced computing, big data, storage, 5G, 6G, biometrics, AI, and blockchain are going to create a mega infrastructure that will transform the way we do contract and exchange value. Tokenization is at the heart of this transformation. The act of representing an asset in a decentralized database as a token, also known as a digital asset, where participants can have access to data to evaluate assets, use them as collateral, and engage with other parties to contract. The infrastructure that financial institutions and real estate companies rely on today is 50-year-old, and it's not designed to handle the complexity, the information flow, and the threats of our today's world. So the new system will have to ensure clear ownership rights, ensure secure and efficient custody, create transfer methods, and manage the ongoing maintenance of these tokenized assets. So that's why a new model needs to be created with the regulator and innovators. The question is, how are we going to transition from the old to the new? So to start this conversation, I have the pleasure to welcome Michael Clark. Michael Clark, welcome. We are really thrilled to have you today. You are the head of digital transformation at MasterCard, but today you are here with your hat of writer and futurist. You are advising governments and companies on digital innovation, and particularly on the field of the data economy. And your upcoming book, Data Revolution, The New Currency of You, is a roadmap for businesses and governments and citizens to use data as a vector of exchange. So welcome, Michael, and we'll be thrilled to have an explanation of what is the data economy and what is it so important.
Oh, it's lovely to be here, and such a timely conversation, and so nice to be around so many people who are talking about this topic. So you start with the biggies. So what is the data economy? And we've talked about this offline, and I've had these conversations many times. I think, look, the first thing we have to understand before we even get to a data economy is understand how we got here, and almost why is data now suddenly becoming important. The irony is data's always been here, as is our identity. It just got lost in the middle of all the industrial revolutions that you just described. It was at the heart of all of those, but in the middle of all of that, our data itself got lost in terms of our ownership and what it means to own it. Even the concept of property when it relates to data, ironically, was missed when we particularly signed copyright laws in 1710. They evolved through history, but they were all just data, right? Art, literature was all data by itself, but we missed it. And there were consequences of that through the ages, because the way that we measured value never really changed from the second industrial revolution. And as a consequence, people lost the rights of their data. The reason we can have this conversation today is because we've now left the digital revolution behind. Countries around the world like China and others are recognizing now that data is the key to their next economy, because it's a critical function of what's going to make AI work. But more importantly, because of the concept of AI, and also the fact that technologies have converged. We sit here today where virtual reality, AI, machine learning, compute power, networks have all converged at exactly the same time. And for the first time in history, we're now able to have this conversation about ownership, knowing that we have the technologies to make it possible. Now it's just the will and the desire to change. So the data economy, by its definition now, is an economy that's powered by an asset, probably our greatest asset that we've never really used properly. And now that's going to power nations. It's also going to power next generation utilities. But the token is the key to how, in essence, we're going to move this around securely. Because there's another fundamental reason why the economy is so important, is because we've now reached a point where data privacy doesn't work. It is about to fall badly because now AI and various other technologies are making privacy even harder. And the answer probably is not privacy anymore. It's probably ownership and choice. And the technologies that we're talking about today give people the opportunity to choose how private they want to be, but also how they can start exchanging, which is really at the heart of the data economy, is the basis of creating new utilities, new experiences, but driven by the rights of people in terms of how they want those experiences to work. We're talking about a $3 trillion industry when we talk about the data economy, and about 550 billion, 550 billion in Europe, or billion, I should say, in Europe alone by 2025, 2026. So this is no meaningless economy. The question we all now have to ask ourselves is, how do we want this economy to run? And is this a moment to actually go back to first principles and ask ourselves, what is data, what is value, and how do these new technologies start to facilitate it?
Right, and this is fascinating. But for people to understand, because I think it's a difficult concept to grasp for the public, what would that mean for individuals and for companies? Like, what would be the future for individuals as far as their private data, and what data are we talking about when you talk to an individual or a citizen?
So it's a really good question. Funny enough, I was talking to a regulator today. So data on its own is completely worthless. It's only when it's linked to an identity does it become suddenly valuable. Hence why your identity on the dark web is worth thousands, because when they have it, they can give data a context and a meaning. So when I talk about personal data, I don't just mean your name, because that's just a name. I'm really talking about a profile that you now suddenly define when you sign up to a website or you sign up to a particular entity. That now suddenly becomes your legal right, because that now suddenly becomes a digital asset in its own right. So for the individual, what this now does, it not only allows them to take ownership of their identity and their data and how it's used, but now they can start monetizing it, because ultimately that now becomes traceable because of the token. Every time that profile is used, but also that individual token becomes a universal access to profiles. So let me give you an example. Let's just say, and this is possible today, in 2 to 3 years' time, I'm going on holiday and someone says to me, well, you can come earlier if you give me access to your passport sooner. No problem. I'll take an image of my passport. I'll turn it into a token and I'll send you the token. Because today we freely give away that photograph of our passport about 100 times probably in a given course of a year and don't even think about it. Whereas now for the individual, now they have ultimate privacy around their personal assets, but they can also use them to create utilities. They can also start building utilities to even build programs that manage their health. So all of a sudden now data is now working for them rather than software working against them. And what does it mean for the business world? Well, now it comes down to a meaningful value exchange. What's in it for me as a person for me to even want to share my data with you in the first place? In some respects, it's why open banking never has really fulfilled its potential, because we've spent too much time talking about open banking rather than the value exchange and what open banking enables. So for companies now, ironically, it'll force them to start looking at where the value is in their data, because ownership will actually take that away from them. And the reality is, where is the value in my data now? But more importantly, I'm now forced to think about how do I get the best from my data, but also what do I give people in return, either be it an experience or a monetary value, underpinned by trust, because that's really at the cornerstone of all of this that makes someone want to part with their data.
Right. So what does it mean, like, for let's say health data? Are you going to be able to share some of it? How do you manage the open source side of data and the privacy side of data? Who's going to decide what is private, what is public?
So that'll be down to you, because the interesting thing is, when you start going down this rabbit hole, you start to unravel things that are now no longer required because now I own them. So you've just mentioned the word personal data, but when I own it, there's no such thing. I either own it or I don't. So it's user-owned data, and I decide how private or public I choose to be, driven by my identity and the linkage to the token. So if you talk about healthcare today, the biggest issue in America is the fact that HIPAA has put a straitjacket around innovation because healthcare professionals are frightened to do anything with data because of the concern and confusion of how data privacy laws differentiate between different states. So actually, the irony is, as a healthcare consumer, I actually suffer because I can't get the services that I actually need. Now, when I want to share my health data today, I can't. But also, don't forget, your data is siloed today. So I have versions of my health that I have with my doctor. I have versions of my health that I'm tracking on my Apple Watch. All of these are elements of my health life. All of a sudden, now they're tokenized. I can bring them all together into a single perspective to actually build a version, a visualization of my actual health, which I can then port and bring and also use as utilities to manage my health.
I think what you are describing is what already happens in the real life, because we have as many personas as we know people, because people only know a certain set of data about us. So now the technology allows us to create different versions of ourselves that we can share depending on the person who is asking that type of data. And so that's only because technology came up with the tools that we are able to do so.
Exactly. But also don't forget, example spot on. If I get even into a Tesla car today and I log into Spotify, it only has one perspective of my music life. What we're really saying now is today, whether we know it or not, we sign up to, there's probably 150, 200 profiles about us on the internet. Because every time we sign up to a service, we give about 10 pieces of our identity away, not because they want us to sign up, because the data that's connected to the identity generates value. So now all of a sudden, because I own it, I can now combine all of these into a real version of me or many versions of me as perspectives. So I could create a professional version of me, which tracks my career, because now I connect my LinkedIn profile, I connect maybe memberships I'm assigned to, and I can create these perspectives. And as to your point, we do this every day. There's a version of me that I go home and my family sees. There's a version that we see right now on this call, and there's a version of you that was this morning. The difference is, in the world of today, that's broken as a set of connections because we don't see the full picture. What data ownership and when we tokenize it gives us, it puts us in control, but to create a full picture and then decide how public or private that we want to be. We might even make purchases in the future, and we do it today, by the way, in Roblox, where purchases are made based on reputation, not based on not based on my name, not based on my identity. It's basically my reputation. And in some cases, I will choose how much of myself to expose, because actually maybe giving me a better experience or maybe for my financial gain, but just enough so I don't give too much of myself away. So this is really what this is all about, putting the ownership back into the individual, but then actually not hiding behind the fear of privacy, but turning it on its head and saying, well, actually, let's give people the choice of how private they want to be. So the regulator then can focus on the right things, which is security, ethics, and all those other things that are going to be amazingly important as we move forward into the next economy.
So I think the regulator job now is to acknowledge the value of ownership for individuals over their data. It needs to be like recognized as a principle, as a fundamental principle. The ownership of data, which is not the case. Casey, you stop me if I'm wrong, but I think there is no definition of ownership in data right now in the world as a legal standpoint.
That's right. That's right. But there's also, Michael, what you're saying is very, very interesting. You said that the private individual should have their ownership, and this is how we should go forward so that things will work out. And what we're seeing, and I'm just, referring to a report that was given to our president just only last week concerning artificial intelligence. And they're saying we should now consider rethinking our approach to personal data because it can no longer perhaps be organized through our individual liberties and private full consent, and that possibly now we should go to more collective ways of managing our data. What do you think about that?
So, I think we and I chatted about this offline. We both looked at each other very confused and very concerned. Again, but the problem is with all this case is we're applying the old toolbox to new problems. So the reality is, look, the truth of the matter really is that none of us are going to ever manage our own data every day. because there's too much of it. We create 1.7 meg of data every second, which is the equivalent of 1,000 digital photographs by the time you've gone to bed. Every individual has created. I've been speaking for 1 minute. 5 million people have just searched Google, right? So these numbers are they're growing. Like the IDC says, what, 175 zettabytes of data, which is completely incorrect. They didn't include in their work EV vehicles, headsets. That number, believe it or not, is 74,000 zettabytes of data in the next 4 or 5 years. If the whole world can connect to data and live to 90, that's about 65 million football stadiums worth of data. So that's the way we're at, right? They're the numbers. So the reality is I'm going to use a company to manage my data for me. That's the real fact of the matter. And I also have a company that will manage my identity for me as well, because they will be the ones on my behalf that will verify my credentials. And I will have a wallet of some kind. And the irony in all of this is the technology that we're fighting against will be the technology that actually enables the ownership and the data revolution, because AI will be operating on my wallet, helping me manage my data and get the best of it, even helping me define my own intrinsic values related to the data that now I own. We basically, what's really exciting for me is I'm engaging a lot of regulators around the world who want to do this, who are starting to recognize that data is actually no different to any other digital asset. And they're now starting to realize that this is the first part of this journey, which is the first two parts of the jigsaw are you need to make data identity part of a legal system, which countries around the world are already doing, which is why we're here.
Yeah, for example, maybe you can explain which country right now taking this as a legal standpoint.
So the first example is probably the model I've built in the book, and this is a big plea to Estonia. I could literally walk into Estonia tomorrow and they could adopt the models in the book that are being described because they have the two pieces of the puzzle. They have data ownership for the citizens, and they also have identity, and they've been one of the biggest consumers of blockchain since the very beginning. The other market, which you probably wouldn't have thought about, even though Estonia is a bit way out there, is Brazil. So Brazil last year was the first country in the world to make data monetization legal for its citizens. They have the PIX network. They have account-to-account payment. Their next logical journey on their vision is digital assets. So, and they've also one of the few countries in the world now that allows you to pay with Bitcoin in stores. So, the next with blockchain and everything else they're building, the next logical route is ownership. And then once they do that, they have the basis to create an economy. So there are countries around the world that are ready and they're willing. They're just now waiting for the models, which is part of the book. And more importantly, part of the people on this call, who are the clever people, they're going to bring the technology to life that's going to make this a reality. The job now of the regulator in all of this is to now be in the driver's seat. But I think the most important thing I'd want them to take away is they now need to be involved in research projects from the very beginning, rather than being involved after the fact. I think all of us on this call has a massive opportunity to not look at the regulator as somebody that's going to hold us back, as somebody that we can partner with. And all of this stuff is designed from the outset. So we don't end up in the position we are in 4 or 5 years' time where we've got to break up AI companies, or we've got to be very concerned that we have centralized oversight over AI. Or in fact, the worst case is small to medium businesses, as it is today, by the way, can't afford to implement AI because it's actually too expensive for them. So we end up creating a monopoly for ourselves. So this community and others have a huge part to play, because you guys are the underpinning technologies going to drive a future that wasn't possible 5, 10, 25 years ago.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about companies. You talk about bartering, exchanging value. So that would mean a company would be able to create certain data sets, put a value onto them, and exchange them against other data sets from other companies without going through the traditional financial system. So that is a big leap. How do you explain that?
So it happens today, believe it or not. So there are, in Web3, there are data unions. So today, basically, people pool data together in pools, and then smart contracts execute that when it's been traded on a marketplace, and everybody gets rewarded. So this model exists right now. Even things like Ocean Protocol and others are actually moving to this system. Now, the big shift is, to be honest, is also value to value exchange. So we assume that everything will have a price. The greatest thing that blockchain ever gave us was something I wrote about 4 years ago, and it didn't have a name, was the ability to do an intent. So I can now create an intent, which is an intent to sell or an intent to buy. So I can issue an intent into the market, like a limit order in a stock market. I can define the purpose of what I want, the quantity, how much I want of it, when I want it, and what it's for. And then a beacon somewhere in the problem solver or somebody who can deliver me that, or even I'm going to sell to, will combine, we'll match, we'll share smart contracts, and our data will be turned into our wallets as value. But the really interesting one, which Casey and I talked about, is value to value, which in bartering days, I've got a pig and you've got a cow, right? We both see value in what each other has got, we're going to share them. Now, in the real world, clearly I'm not going to do that. But in the digital world, maybe we've both got diabetes. One of us is following the traditional model of nutrition, or sorry, medication, and I'm the one that's doing more holistically through food fitness and nutrition. Why don't we swap data? Because actually there may be value on both sides. And then maybe I'll issue an intent. One of us will issue an intent to say, hey, we'd like to sell this, or maybe I want to buy some more data. All of a sudden now, a pharmaceutical company could pick that up. In 5-6 years' time, running on a quantum infrastructure, who's to know that we couldn't solve something really important? So a lot of this also, don't forget, and this is some of the work I do every day anyway, is intelligent rails that underpin this. So yes, data will be a currency, but AI will determine what the appropriate rail will be for that currency. So if I'm buying something in Amazon today, it will work out whether the right currency for Amazon is data today, or whether it'll be some other form of currency, maybe even it'll be traditional fiat that does the job. So this is a mega mind shift. But the funny thing is, the rails that make all this work are already being built, because we do account-to-account payments and we can move digital payments already. What we're really talking about is just pushing another asset through a digital exchange. This does require, though, new ways of clearing data. Now, in my travels, I was lucky to meet the people building the world's first digital clearinghouse in London, linked to the digital pound. So I wanted to meet them because I wanted to ask a very simple question, which is, if data was a token, could I collateralize it and run it on an exchange? And the answer was yes.
Yeah.
So the tools are being built for digital assets. When data becomes a token in its own right, I can run it on exactly the same rails and treat it the same way. It just means that in doing so, we need to revisit the way that we measure and quantify value. And we also need to really think about the way that we certify data. We also rate it, but also the way we clear it, and also the fees that we apply to it, which is in the book in a way.
Yeah.
But more importantly, this is the conversations I'm having with regulators. But the first starting point is none of that, because as you rightly say, that's a mind shift. The first starting point in all of this story is, let's go back to ground zero and actually treat data as a digital asset and go back to first principles and say, well, what is data? What is value? And what does identity mean? And then given all of that and all the work the regulators now doing to deal with this new world, how does now data fit into this story and align to it? Which, by the way, it really does. But you have to then look at it through the digital asset lens for suddenly it now to make sense.
Right. And you mentioned that AI will provide sort of the valuation of the data, but where is human input in that? Like, who will be deciding what's valued, and collectively as human, what's our interaction with that new system? How we can participate with AI?
Yeah, so and AI, I just wanted to add, Michael, how can we be sure that this value that's going to be, I mean, I understand it's complex and sufficiently complex that we will need machine, it had to be automated, and understand the importance of AI. I'm just saying, how can we be sure that the value that will be given is something that is legally compliant and or that is fair, even just fair?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that's right. So I'll answer the first bit, which is the pricing bit, then I'll answer the fairness. So the pricing bit is based on two variables, which we don't do today. The first is the most important, which is intrinsic value. Because when you load up your data into any environment, whether someone's looking after you or you're storing it in your wallet, you're going to need to define the intrinsic value of that data, which means how unique is it? How old is it? What does it mean to you? You know, uniqueness, all these things that were replaced by uniformity and scale because of the world we moved into. So those will be unique to every individual. And that intrinsic value holds incredible value to you, but also to the outside world. Even reputation will become a form of intrinsic value, which ironically increases the more you actually use data and trade it. So your intrinsic value moves into a calculation, which then combines that with the extrinsic value to the outside world.
Like, what's the data value to me as an intrinsic value? What's the data value to me? And as an extrinsic value, what's this data valuable to others?
Yeah.
Right.
Now, data is one of the most bizarre things. It's everything and nothing at exactly the same time. because in one environment, in one context, data could be worth $1 million. The same environment, the same data is absolutely worthless.
Yes.
So, and not only that, data will be changing price every minute and every second, more than a stock exchange. So that's why the smart contracts themselves will have inbuilt pricing engines or pricing components that will be variable, that will deal with the environment. Exactly like a market when you lock in a price.
Yeah.
Price will be locked in between both parties. And ultimately, then that's when the transaction is rated. Now, when you talk about fairness, that's why you also have to, those intrinsic values become so important. Because actually what may be important to me is I don't care how much you want to pay for me. You're not a sustainable company. You're not ethical. You don't actually align to my intrinsic values, which we may think is, oh, well, that's a bit out there. But actually, that's what the customer of tomorrow actually cares about. That's what a 14-year-old girl or a 12-year-old boy thinks about right now. They don't care about the individual. They care about the power of the collective and the community and what's ethical and what's trustworthy. So they will become elements of what is a fair transaction, because I'm going to dictate who I want to do business with and what actually is fair and what's not. Now, the final piece of the puzzle is who ensures this is a fair ecosystem. So there has to be a wrapper around all of this where, in effect, companies, regulators, even individuals will come together and define a set of principles.
Yes.
And then those principles will be implemented and managed by AI, who will effectively operate and oversee that ecosystem, with the human having the final decision.
Right.
Because I think we're all living in planet Zod if you think that people are going to lose all of their jobs. We're now moving to the world where we're augmenting to work alongside AI. So we need to work collectively to define these. I'll tell you a story. I was on a panel, I won't name where, and I started talking about what the future of data means and the implications of why we're not looking at it in the right way. And I started talking about digital twins. I started talking about all the ways that data is now being used, and then the role of AI in all of this. In that very room was a room full of lawyers. Next to me was a lawyer for a company I won't name. And he meant to me, look, you may not have a clue what Mike's talking about to the audience, but I think we need to go back to first principles. And so I let it go. And then I came back and I said, this is exactly why regulators need to work with us and other people like me and other people, because whether you like it or not, people are building exactly what I'm describing right now. Right. Even the EU themselves is building a digital twin of planet Earth. Absolutely. So like if we cannot work together with the regulator, what hope have they got when they're struggling to understand individual technologies in isolation? Because the regulator's not thinking macro. They're not thinking how all of these things connect and what does it mean, which is what we do every day in our jobs. So that oversight layer is critical to how we manage how things are fair and how they operate.
Yeah, and back to my introduction where I said that the actual system, the actual infrastructure, whether it's the legal infrastructure or the commercial infrastructure or the financial infrastructure, is dated from almost 50 years old, and it's not made for the flow of information that we are constantly bombarded with, and that we need to adapt, and we need to adapt to perpetual change. And so perpetual change can only be dealt with a very high computing capacity and the help of AI. So thankfully we got technology, or we could go back to the cave age and go back to the farm age and go back in the progress of humankind. But I don't think that that's necessarily the step we are taking.
No. So we'll end up with.
I think what's happening is inevitable.
Yeah, no, it's inevitable. I think inevitable is the right word, because this is almost like we're seeing around the world now with elements fracturing, because old principles just don't function anymore. They don't fit in the world that we live in. And what's interesting in what you said, and I use this reference in the book as well, there'll be elements that you will use yourself because they will run in your own environment, but there will be others where you'll have to call services, because actually the compute power required to clear a transaction, generate a projection, all of these things that you're going to be doing with data, there's no way on earth you're going to run that locally. So you're going to have to use an AI, but it'll be an AI as a service that you will use as a compute. Or in the beginning, it'll just be a company, someone that you will use like an NVIDIA or somebody like an Omniverse that will give you the vast compute power that you need. But your point is completely valid. We're going to be slamming around more data than we've ever seen in our life. And then once we get to 6G, then life gets really interesting. I'll give you also another reason this is why this is also important, and I don't think many people have realized this. So when Apple launched their Vision Pro glasses last year, it was quite a big moment, right? To me, it was the next channel of engagement, but also we also redefined biometrics and security, The other thing that we did, which went unnoticed, was human emotion now became a data set. For the first time in our life, 55% of human conversation, which is non-verbal, can now be seen and recorded as gestures.
I mean, they can detect our emotions. They can detect their emotion, and that becomes data sets as well.
By definition, that becomes a data set, because now I can observe you, you become observable, and I can see the things associated with you in terms of a virtual thing, which could be payment information, it could be anything related to you, and then I can compute based on that. You will perform an action in that environment, which will trigger something else. It'll be a transaction, it'll be whatever. But I also know the mood of you and what you were doing in the state that you were in. So I always make this joke, and this is a bit out there, but today, if my smartwatch goes up and my heart rate rises, it knows that it probably sends me to the doctor because it thinks my heart rate has risen too much. The reality is, with my glasses and the watch, it now knows my phone bill and I've opened it and I can't pay it, which is why my heart rate's risen. So whilst that seems far-fetched, what we're doing over time with all these technologies is building a much clearer context of a person. And because of it, we'll generate even more data, which then reinforces the question, how private do we want to be, and how is privacy going to control now, where I'm going to be flip-flopping between virtual and real worlds constantly in the next 5 years. We've just started the journey, but the reality is we have an opportunity to go back to first principles now, particularly with AI becoming like a general purpose technology like electricity. It touches every industry and every person. But for the first time ever, we have the tools at our disposal to, ironically, if we did ownership and all the things we're going to talk about today as assets, AI would become twice as powerful, because now we would be using our data as the input rather than spending all our life talking about outputs and experiences that the tools develop.
I have a question just, and Matt, we're just about 4 minutes to the end, about stealing data, Michael. So, okay, so we've been seeing all the cyber attacks and data is being stolen every single minute all around the world. And this is so huge and so much at scale as well. So now you speak about AI and you spoke about platforms, smart contracts, and all the technology that's going to help us to manage our data. Do you think this is going to help us to have more secure data against all this theft, or is it going to increase the risks?
So I think, look, if we carry on down the privacy route, it will increase, because the regulator will spend most of their time trying to figure out privacy. If we take privacy off the table and we put ownership back on the table to people, and we use cryptography, we use biometrics, we use all of these things to protect consumers' data, in fact, their profiles become encrypted, then that means, what does the regulator have to do? The regulator is just suddenly going to go on the beach and drink Kool-Aid and say, right, my job's done. The reality is no. What you can now focus on is how to make sure the security in the ecosystem works. So now, rather than just focus on privacy, which is it's a losing battle, quite frankly, and we've never done it right. You know, Cambridge Analytica suddenly put data in the public domain. We had the opportunity in America when the basis of GDPR was created, and we didn't do it. We called them principles, which became GDPR, which then came extensions of that, but it was still privacy was the core topic. And we know ever since data breaches happen, as you say, every minute, every second of every day. But if suddenly we didn't have to worry so much about privacy, all of a sudden then the conversation shifts to say, well, as a regulator, what next generation technologies could I be looking at for security? How can I be governing businesses now in terms of how secure they are when people give them their data as custodians to manage that data effectively? And more importantly, how are people managing ethics and trust and all of these things? Rather than trying to fight a losing battle, trying to apply a toolbox to technologies that, quite frankly, are not the same as the technologies we were trying to regulate 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
Right. Amazing. And I think we, as citizens and as companies, we really need to have this conversation. Casey and I are part of an organization called Data Governance for Smarter Citizen, and that's where it's a forum where we tackle those topics of data ownership. And Michael, I think we will be talking about it for you to join us. That would be really great to have you. So if we want to have like one takeaway for people that listen to us today, what do we need to memorize from these learnings?
I think there's two parts to this puzzle. I think, look, I think what's coming is inevitable. That's the way that's the first thing I would say. And I think the other thing I would take away is I love this statement that a famous, I think it was somebody at Salesforce said it. Look, our job as innovators, futurists, technologists is to meet our customer in the future when they arrive. So they know that everything works because we solve the identity problem, we solve the data problem, and they actually have nothing to worry about because it just works. We are potentially going to be in a position where we're going to give things back to people for the first time. Markets around the world will do it. I think everyone on this call who are innovators, technologists, have such a massive role to play to enable something that we've never been able to do before. In doing so, we will create an economy and an asset more powerful than we've ever seen. And to know that you have the opportunity to be part of that, I think is incredibly exciting. The book I'm writing, quite frankly, is not about me. It's about a puzzle and a story that I've just managed to pull together from speaking to a lot of smart people. And the reality is that the story I'm portraying is potentially a blueprint and a map for all of us to follow and try and implement as technologists, because the model is the model. Our job now is to evangelize to the public, to get them aware of what all this means. My job, in a way, and many others, is to work with regulators to get them prepared to lead. And then we have another role to play, which is my other role is, well, how do we make sure that businesses don't fail and can participate, but done in the right way and rethinking data as liquidity. So for me, there are two takeaways. This is going to happen, whether we like it or not, because markets are pushing for it. Regulators are thinking about it. The real takeaway for everybody in this call is you have an opportunity to facilitate it and lead in the markets that you're in, or even the companies that you're in, because this is an opportunity that doesn't come around very often.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. Your book is called Data Revolution, the New Currency of You. It's coming up soon. I'm sure we will be talking about it again. Thank you so much, Michael. It was really a pleasure to have you with us. And so
Speak to you soon.
Yes, no doubt.
Take care. Take care. So this takes us to the subject, the topic of the day, which is tokenization. So tokenization, as we said, is the act of representing an asset from the real world in a distributed ledger or in a blockchain, and representing also the ownership rights over this asset. So you need to represent the parties. That means identity of the person who owns the asset, the identity of the custodian of the asset, potentially the buyers, and all the stakeholders that will interact with this asset. Then you need to represent the asset itself. And the state of the asset. You need to be able to update the state of this asset, so to inform the stakeholders. And you need to plan for dispute and claims, and you need to create automated contract to interact with these assets. So to continue the conversation, we are going to tackle now a particular type of asset, which is the financial assets. And for that, I will welcome now Anton Golub and Liam Karwan from Tokeny. So welcome, guys. Pleasure to have you here. Hello, hello.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, and welcome. So Anton, we are going to start the conversation with you. Anton and I know each other because you are an advisor to Magma and we are friends, so we talk a lot, and especially on LinkedIn. So Anton, you are a former trader. You are an entrepreneur. You have experience in the traditional finance, and you are also an entrepreneur in the crypto space. So you have both sides of the coin, traditional finance and decentralized finance. Can you introduce yourself briefly and then explain what you are doing?
Yeah, so first, thank you very much, Matthew, for welcoming me, and really excited to be on today's discussion, and it's going to be just awesome. So really, thank you very much for giving me the honor and privilege to participate. Yeah. So just very brief introduction on my side. As Matthew mentioned, I come originally from traditional finance. So I worked at a big hedge fund in Switzerland as a high frequency trader. So something very exciting, new, innovative, a crossroads between technology, markets, mathematics, which is my background, finance, and really enjoyed this experience. And also learned actually there firsthand how markets and how the financial infrastructure works. as a particular example, as I was high frequency trader, that meant I was trading in milliseconds, so extremely fast. But when I would take a look how the settlement, the actual swap of the assets would look like in the financial markets, I would find out, or I would learn, that it takes several days to actually settle the assets.
Right.
It was very puzzling for me, to see that,
Right.
Where do we end up from a few milliseconds? How do we end up from milliseconds in trading, kind of down that supply chain that it actually takes a couple of days to settle a transaction? And obviously,
Right.
For people who are on the call, they know the answer is actually because of the financial infrastructure, which is batch-based, runs in daily cycles, and it's highly inefficient. It's from the 70s and really doesn't deliver on its use and promise what we need today. So this was my background, and then I would like to say I was at the right place at the right time at the beginning of the Swiss crypto valley back in 2013. I co-founded the second ever crypto company in Switzerland called 𝐀𝐆𝐄𝐃, with a vision to build a digital asset exchange on top of the blockchain. So kind of use the blockchain as a settlement infrastructure to issue, digitize, and tokenize assets, and then swap them in a very efficient way on the blockchain directly and run an exchange on top of that. So, and 𝐀𝐆𝐃 was a massive success story, which you see now the logo behind me. We scaled the company from 2 to 200 people. It's one of the oldest and biggest crypto exchanges, digital asset exchanges in Europe. And I really enjoyed this journey. And I did an exit from 𝐀𝐆𝐃 back in 2018 to launch the market making company. And why a market maker? Because when you run an exchange, a digital asset exchange, you learn the first day how important liquidity is for all of these assets. Because if you don't have liquidity, the assets fail, just nothing happens. You cannot transact in them easily. And from them, for me, there was a clear understanding this is a no-brainer opportunity, because every digital asset exchange, every tokenized assets will need liquidity. And I launched Fluff Technologies, or FluffTech, that I was leading as a CEO for almost 5 years, where we were market making all of your top tier exchanges that I'm sure you would know of. And likewise, your market making for tokens of projects, some really huge famous ones that were transacting in billions per day, but also a lot of early stage ones. So kind of I saw all shapes and sizes. I did an exit from a market making company in mid of 2022. And then I launched an initiative called SwissAssetDAO, where I met Mathieu as well over time. And in a nutshell, the initiative of SwissAssetDAO is to enable real-world assets investment opportunities to crypto-native companies. So for almost a decade, we had a lot of capital coming in from the traditional world into the crypto world. So this is your buying your tokens and coins. And now there's a lot of actually, in our view, capital and assets that want to actually go their way back, in a sense, access sustainable long-term investment opportunities that come from the real.
Right. And so with you, I want to touch on the differences between traditional finance, what we call off-chain, and the decentralized finance, what we call on-chain. So before we go with Liam after, that we talk about the platform that is running and the new standards of the decentralized world, I want to make the difference, and maybe we'll go after on the slides. But before, can you give a little bit of overview of how the traditional finance work when it comes to settlement of a financial instrument compared to decentralized finance?
Yeah. So to explain, there's actually two major differences when it comes to traditional finance and DeFi, and also particularly when it comes to settlement. The first one, actually, I will say, which is obvious one, is actually in terms of the latency. So, I mean, anybody who has ever interacted in traditional finance, knows that the settlement actually and clearing takes many times several days. And if you for the first time encounter that,
what we hear is T+1, T+1, T+2, or T+3, or T+5 sometimes.
And just to explain like where this actually comes from, where you actually go into the financial infrastructure, you talk to people who have been operating it for decades. What you will learn, that they will tell you that the processes they have built in the 70s and the 60s, which was your paper-based and batch-based. What happened is in those early days, they actually digitized and computerized those processes. So it's not like they were reinventing what was happening, but actually automated, computerized, and digitized this process. And now if you think about it, how did the process look like many decades ago? It was literally paper-based. You know, Matthew, and if you and I wanted to do a transaction, I would literally sign a paper, send it to you by mail. You know, you would have to receive it. You would have to countersign it. This would have to go back. And this process was actually digitized. And what that means is actually they have the financial system has created a settlement infrastructure that is batch-based and operates in daily cycles. So what that means in plain language is that you have transactions that happen during the day, like with me as a high-frequency trader. All that goes in a queue, right? Then at the end of the trading day, when the settlement actually hits, then these transactions are processed. Then we discover, then we discover
exactly
if you can settle
reconciliation.
Exactly. And I actually explained now an ideal situation, which happens, for instance, in FX, foreign exchange markets, or in equity markets, where it only takes a day or two. But you have, for instance, mortgage-backed securities, where the process that I just described is still done through Excel sheets, PDFs, completely manually, where the settlement takes 2 weeks. And now you could argue, okay, but so what's the big deal? Okay, it takes longer, not ideal, but what's the big deal? Now the big deal is actually that first point is that the financial players don't know how their balance sheet looks like, because if that transactions are not settled, I don't know what I have.
Yes.
And secondly, because you don't know how your balance sheet looks like, and because the settlement is not completed, you have a capital charge against that. So the regulator sets a capital charge for you in case if a settlement fails. Because if a settlement fails, you have losses, right?
Yes.
So these are actually like a practical challenges happening.
It's long, it's risky, and it's costly.
Absolutely. So it's risky, costly, and just highly inefficient, and it needs a reboot completely. Now in DeFi, you literally have something that is called an atomic swap. An atomic swap, just in plain language, means that, Matteo, if you and I do a transaction, that means that I get asset at the same time you get my asset. So it's really like you and I do a trade, and then a swap happens immediately, instantly. And for people who come from traditional finance like I do, the terminology for what I just described is called instantaneous payment versus delivery. So as soon as I pay, I get the delivery, and vice versa. Exactly. Yes, so these are atomic swaps, and they actually happen natively on the blockchain, is because that's how blockchain operates. When you have a transaction, you have all the transactions go to in a block, and a block in a blockchain gets processed extremely fast, and then all the transactions are separate. So this is the latency part. Now I want to actually emphasize, maybe even more important one for the long-term future, is that in decentralized finance, you don't have counterparty risk. So this is a very important point, is that decentralized finance removes a lot of the intermediaries that create the risks that I just described before, is because in decentralized finance, Matthew and I can transact directly. So we don't have a clearing agent, we don't have a paying agent, we don't have a settlement agent, we don't have a broker, we don't have all these people in between who create highly inefficient processes, cost us high fees to do a transaction. But we can actually do a direct transaction between you and me.
But that's only possible because the condition of the settlements are already written beforehand. So and met, and then it won't transact if the conditions are not met.
Exactly.
So basically, all the verification happens before instead of after.
Exactly. So kind of like what I described is you have the matching of the trade, you have the clearing of the trade, and then you have the settlement of the trade. These three steps are integrated within the blockchain, and they can be executed and done within one operation. And highly important is that blockchain by nature is decentralized, so it's not run by a single entity. You don't have one single point of failure, and you don't have a single point of control that can be malicious and actually invalidate transactions for any single reason.
Right. I want to go into the model that is being applied now. Maybe I want to share a slide that we discussed on LinkedIn, and I really like this this presentation, so I'm going to share it with you guys, and you can explain to us what is happening now and what will happen in the future. So hold on, let me share this. Okay, this one. So can you take us through this?
So this particular slide, that I think also material we can, it can be shared later as well with the
Yes,
audience.
I will share to the audience. Yes.
Yeah. But this slide kind of, the goal of this slide is kind of to present what is the possible spectrum of tokenization of assets and the use of blockchain potentially in transacting, clearing, and settling trades of those assets. Kind of as we look at this spectrum, or these possibilities, how tokenization can work, we kind of see on left side and right side, extremes.
So left is what we are right now, status quo.
The left is, let's do the same batch-based processes, and where it takes forever and it's extremely expensive. And on the far right, you literally have fully on-chain issuance and recording of assets. So this is extremely important. Then secondly, that the legal enforcement of your rights in any disputes is also done on-chain. And finally, that we have secondary market protocols or venues with liquidity directly on-chain when there's tokenized assets can be transacted. So this is actually the two extremes that we can actually have in mind. Now the question is maybe for people that anybody might be wondering, saying, okay, this is a beautiful graph or a nice graph, but so what and where are we now? Or maybe the question, why are we not fully on the right? Or why are we, I think
exactly, because some assets are issued on-chain, but you need to enforce them off-chain because you have a legal process, and some assets are also registered with a special vehicle, and then you tokenize the special vehicle. So you are 1 foot off-chain and 1 foot on-chain. So how does that work, in the future? How do you enforce? Because this special vehicle, when we say there is a special vehicle, is meant for something, right, Casey? When we do a company, right? Why do we do a company for?
So Matthew, I think it's like, it could be very important just in like 2 sentences to explain how does tokenization work today? Because I think many times people just don't know how it works in most cases. So literally what happens is if you have an asset in the real world, that can be real estate, bond, private equity portfolio, just imagine something. The way it works is actually you set up a special purpose vehicle that Matthew mentioned. So in plain language, it's kind of just like a fund. That fund then actually buys that asset, manages the assets, manages the cash flow, holds the assets. And then what happens is how we bring this asset on chain is we actually tokenize the special purpose vehicle. So we tokenize the units of the security units of the special purpose vehicle, and we bring them on chain through this tokenization process. And then we say we have tokenized the real world assets. Now, anybody who just heard what I just described might say, wow, this is extremely complex and complicated. Why the heck would anybody do that? Because it seems like you're not really bringing assets on chain. You're tokenizing the vehicle that holds the assets. And the reason is actually because today we don't have, in most cases and in most places around the world, we don't have the means and the laws and the regulation how to bring assets directly on chain. Or to say it very precisely, there's very few jurisdictions around the world where you can directly issue asset on chain and record it, enforce your rights, and also trade them in the end. So this process of tokenization of special purpose vehicle to bring an asset on chain is highly complex, it's highly inefficient, it introduces huge fees. And finally, in my view, no professional investor would touch this in their lifetime. Because just imagine it, what I'm describing here is that you get a token where you don't know clearly how the legal setup works, is because there's not a lot of use cases, not a lot of examples, what it means from a legal perspective when you have this token. And this token gives you a right in a SPV or for a unit in an SPV that's offshore, that's quite complex, that actually kind of indirectly gives you a claim and right on an asset. So my point here is actually this is extremely complex. It doesn't work. And so far, the track record has proven that it doesn't work. Namely, what I mean by that is that the only counterparties that would buy this kind of tokens are actually crypto native companies. So only crypto natives will buy a token, crypto native companies would buy a token that gives you some right to a unit in a special purpose vehicle that holds an asset. And the reason why crypto native companies would buy such tokenized real world assets is they don't have any other option. A crypto native companies cannot go to an investment bank, cannot go to a prime broker and tell them, please buy directly the real world assets, or I want to buy it through a securitization process. It's quite efficient today compared to what I just described.
Yeah.
So no institutional investor, in my view, and this has been proven actually by the track record, would touch this tokenized SPV with a 10-foot pole, because it doesn't give you legal clarity. You get a token that gives you right on an SPV that holds the assets, and is just highly expensive and highly complex.
Okay, I think we will do another podcast on that, because it's so interesting and so deep that we can go on each type of asset to see which one is more fit to a complete on-chain issuing and enforcing on-chain, and which one still necessitates some off-chain interactions. So I think we will do another. If you guys like the topic, let us know on the chat, and we will do another episode with Anton on that. Just to wrap it up.
Are we in the middle of the hybrid? Because enforcement is really being done off-chain. So we're really in the middle of the hybrid. Thank you very much. And we would love to have you back, Anton, because there's so many things that are still left unsaid, but we have to get to Liam as well.
Yes.
So I let Matt go ahead. Thank you very much, Anton.
Thank you, Anton. All right, so let's wrap it up here. Yes, we need to move on, otherwise the other speaker won't have time. So Liam, thank you for being with us. You are the Director of Business Development at Tokeny. You began your Web3 journey in 2020. So if you want to briefly introduce yourself and after explain us what is Tokeny.
Yes, thanks a lot, Matt, for having me. Very excited to be on this panel, and we had very interesting conversations before. So the first one about data, the second one, Anton, which is a topic that I am closer to, which is tokenization, and definitely this slide that is very interesting. So indeed, my professional Web3 journey started in 2020. I guess like a lot of people, I started my crypto and blockchain journey a bit before in 2017. And like a lot of people, I just entered the space, by investing in random cryptocurrencies and expecting a certain yield without particularly knowing what I was actually investing in. And then quickly you enter the rabbit hole and you start getting more interested into the actual underlying technology of what is actually a cryptocurrency. And besides the yield that you can get from it, what can that technology actually enable? And so at that time, I was working in finance, and then I left finance. I worked for a cybersecurity company, and then in 2020, I decided to leave these spaces to actually focus on blockchain. So back then, I created a club in Portugal whose aim was to actually connect people in Portugal, organize educational sessions, networking sessions in the space, and I was advising a few projects on the strategy and marketing. And then I joined Tokeny, which is the company I work for right now, 2 years ago, and it's through that company that we're helping financial institutions around the world to actually put their assets on chain and do this magical participants in this magical concept, which is tokenization, which I wouldn't say has just started. It's definitely picking up, still relatively new, but definitely picking up. So very happy to be on this panel today, and looking forward to answering all of the questions that you and the public might have.
Yeah, so if you can get in, so Tokeny is a platform that allows institutional investors to an institutional issuer to create tokens and allow investors, to purchase these tokens. Basically, it's allowing companies to tokenize assets, but it's not only financial assets, but mainly financial assets. So can you take us through the process, when someone comes to your platform, how does it work, to issue a token?
Yeah, so indeed, Tokeny is a technical provider, meaning that we actually provide technology to our clients. So we don't have a Tokeny branded platform. Rather, we are a technology provider, and we see ourselves as one of the central pieces that is needed into any tokenization project, but not the only one. And I'm going to go over the necessary components in any tokenization project. But any company that wishes to tokenize, as you said, financial instruments or also real-world assets, like commodities, like real estate, like fine art. We have tokenized all of that. Come to us. We provide solutions to create the tokens, issue them, distribute them, and manage them. And that throughout the whole life cycle, meaning already, even when the tokens are already deployed or sold. To service these people or companies, we do that in two ways. One of them being we deploy white label environments, meaning we deploy platforms that are branded under the brand and the colors and the logos of our clients, or via APIs. API usage is usually for more complex projects. Let's say a bank want to actually integrate our technology into their own so that they don't actually have to reinvent the wheel, but want more customization integration into their own system, so we can actually provide that technology. So in essence, what we do, as I mentioned, we are an infrastructure provider, providing the ability for our client to be compliant in the jurisdictions that they choose. And we provide the end-to-end service, meaning issuing, distributing, managing, and yeah, that's pretty much it for what we do.
Awesome. And how many? What's the size of the assets that you have tokenized so far? Because it's quite impressive. So
yeah, so a year ago we did a survey, and we cross-check across our clients, you know, the estimated value of what we have tokenized. We came to the conclusion that it was close to $28 billion worth of assets and securities, which is now, that was a year ago. So if we were to do the survey again, it would be bigger. Yeah, so that's the estimated size.
Awesome. Casey, open your mic.
Yes, Liam. Just wondering if you could go a little bit into that standard that Tokeny has brought in, which is the ERC 3643, and what is the difference between that and the ERC 20?
Right. So first of all, I think before talking about the standard in general, I think it would, and I don't know if you were going into that direction, but I think one very important question and one very important topic is standardization in general. What standardization is. And standardization is really needed into any industry that is nascent, but generally speaking into any industry in general. So a good example that I like to take is USBs, the USB standard. So how you actually plug your device to other devices. And why I like this analogy, it's because imagine if every device had another way to actually connect to other devices. Imagine if for every brand for every laptop that you were purchasing from different brands, you had different ways to connect your phone to it. So USB said, okay, let's actually the USB standard, sorry, helped people across the world to actually rely on one way to actually connect your devices. And that creates bigger industries, that creates interoperability and efficiencies. And so standardization is really at the base layer of any new industry. And that's what at Tokeny right now with our open source blockchain standard, we are focusing on. So now, what is the ERC 3643? We have developed an ERC standard. It used to be proprietary. It used to be called the T-Rex protocol. That's the name of the type of tokens that we were actually deploying back then. And now it's called the ERC 3643. So the ERC 3643, just like the ERC 20 that most people know, is a token standard. It is a set of smart contracts. It is a smart contract that we are deploying to represent an asset on chain. It was built on top of the ERC 20, meaning that an ERC 3643 is natively compatible with any technology that is ERC 20 compatible, making it very transferable and very interoperable. For example, anyone can store an ERC 3643 in their MetaMask, technically speaking. And the difference is that it's a permission token. So everyone here in this panel probably knows that if you own an ERC20, just like a normal cryptocurrency, you can freely transfer it across, wallets without identification or verification. The ERC 3643 is precisely against that, saying we are going to enforce rules and measures and eligibility rules to make sure that you are not going to be able to transfer this token unless the counterparty is actually identified, verified, and eligible to receive this token. So the main difference is precisely that. It's added that permissioning layer that can comfort financial institutions and make sure for them that they can actually identify any investor and restrict transfers as they need it.
Right, so the permission is really the difference between the ERC20, which is permissionless, and ERC 3643 that you need permission because you need to know who is buying your token, depending on the compliance, the jurisdiction. You don't want to sell it to anybody. So that's the main difference, right?
That's right. And on top of the ERC 3643, the way we work at Tokeny is also by implementing what we call on-chain ID, which is what I like to call, as you may have noticed, I like analogies. So on-chain ID is an on-chain claim granting an access to a potential investor to interact with an ERC 3643. An analogy that I like to make to what on-chain ID is a passport. When you cross a border, you need a passport and you get a stamp to be able to cross that border. So the on-chain ID is this, it's exactly this. The on-chain ID is your stamp to be able to cross that border and actually be able to interact with the standard. To give you a concrete example, let's say Matt, Casey, and I both tried, all of us try to qualify to invest in a tokenized fund. We are going to provide our KYC information to a potential issuer, let's say BlackRock, that has tokenized a fund and announced it yesterday. So I don't know if some people saw that in the audience, but BlackRock has announced that they're tokenizing a fund on Ethereum. And let's say that Casey, Matt, and I were to actually get qualified for that or try to get qualified. Matt and I provide our information to BlackRock, and BlackRock decides that we are good to go. We are able to invest at least 100,000. We are not in blacklisted countries, not residents from blacklisted country, but that's not the case for Casey. So Matt and I are actually going to be able to invest in the token because we are going to have that on-chain ID that is going to be deployed for us. But if Casey doesn't have that on-chain ID, it's going to be impossible for me to send the token to Casey, to sell them to Casey or transfer them to Casey without Casey having an on-chain ID. So that's the sort of control mechanism that are enforced via our solutions.
Awesome.
Very interesting, very interesting. And from that, Liam, I wanted to ask you a question about the legal compliance template and how does that work exactly in that standard?
Right.
Like if you have different jurisdictions, for example, how do you ensure that compliance between, like, if I want to issue in Europe and in the US at the same time?
Right.
Yeah. So as a technical provider, our role is really to provide the necessary tools for any issuer to be able to comply with the jurisdictions and the regulations in place in the country of issuance. So basically what we can do as a technical provider is provide as much flexibility as we can to our clients and our customers that are actually using our platform. So for instance, if you are tokenizing an SPV and the requirements in country A is to actually only accept minimum investment tickets of 100,000 and implement a lockup period of a year before allowing an investor to actually sell their share into a secondary market, making sure that also you're not accepting residents from certain countries, making sure that you collect the necessary information, that the information that you collect correspond to the KYC measures and standards in place in the country. And this is our role. So once our collaborators or partners or customers actually know the legal rules and the legal measures to put in place, we are making sure that our technology reflects that. Giving you a concrete example, in Luxembourg, there's going to be a certain KYC procedures to follow in order to make a decision on whether or not to qualify an investor. Let's say a very standard procedure would be to ask identity information, address, political exposure, source of investment, passport copies, driving license, and so on. We at Tokeny provide an onboarding platform to that issuer. We ask the issuer what kind of information need to be collected from the investors. And we make sure that the investors are able to provide all of that information through our platform so that the issuer can collect the information and qualify or not that investor.
Right. But you do make the difference, Liam, always between the question of legal counseling, and people should not be under the illusion that they are actually being counseled as to what are their rights and where they can enforce the token, in fact. But they do have to do their own due diligences still.
Absolutely. And there is a misconception sometimes that if you go through the tokenization route, it's actually going to be easier to structure an offering, which is not the case, because what you're doing when you're tokenizing a security or an asset is actually representing an asset on chain. And as you know, and that's why I like the slide that you showed. We are in fact in the hybrid period. There are some certain jurisdictions in which you can actually issue natively. But using tokenization doesn't actually make it easier to issue and distribute securities. In fact, the tokenization provider should implement the existing rules in the technology. But yes, you should be consulted by legal counsels.
I see that this topic, as on LinkedIn, is triggering a lot of interest. So I see that Colin and François de Chezel are talking about it on the chat. And I suggest that we have an entire next conversation about this topic of SPV or not. Actually, that could be the title of it. Should I SPV or not?
SPV or not?
SPV or not SPV? But this is a very, very interesting topic. And before we wrap it up, Liam, so let's just say that you are compatible with EVM chain, so you can issue tokens on Polygon, Ethereum, Arbitrum, Avalanche, Base, all the EVM environment. But before we wrap it up, just quickly, if you can explain us, out of the 28 billion that you issued as token, can you give us a little bit of the breakdown and what institutions are you working with?
Yes. So first of all, for those
give
who
us
are
some name.
I hope I wasn't too boring with the ERC-3643. And by the way, we didn't choose that name.
Never.
3643 is not a number we chose. We actually wanted a simpler number, like ERC-20 was perfect, but was taken. But for those interested into the standard, we have a non-profit foundation that is based in Luxembourg that manages the ecosystem around the standard. And in that association, that is, you can access the website. It's erc3643.org. You can see the members and the types of financial institutions that are contributing actively to the development of the ecosystem around the standard. So now, a couple of use cases that we usually encounter are fund tokenization. Fund tokenization is a big use case that we have. We recently announced, I think yesterday, that we have tokenized an HSBC money market fund with a client of ours that's called More Liquid. You should definitely check their website and their project, which is really interesting. A few weeks ago, we've announced.
We will leave a link. I will make a document with the link of all the speakers, what their projects are, and so you can leave some info on that. Yes. Sorry.
Great. So for all information, you will be able to find that in the document that Matt will create. But currently, you know, the investor that took the lead into our latest round, which is Apex. Few people know Apex, but Apex is a gigantic company. It's 12,000 employees. They are a fund administrator that they are doing the administration of $4 trillion worth of assets, 4,000 billions worth of assets and securities. And so we do a heavy work with Apex to understand what is the need in the backbone of the industry, in how you actually administer and manage the back office and the management of funds and of private markets. And we're doing a lot of work with them to understand, you know, how can blockchain streamline some of the processes, including onboarding and other pains that they have. But I would say funds, debt, commodities, these are our main use cases, but we've tokenized art pieces and other more exotic asset classes as well.
And real estate, which takes us to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Liam. There are quite a few questions for you on the chat, so please respond.
Yes. I mean, I'm sure we will do another round of these for the next episode. We will dig more deeper into that, but we can say fairly that tokenized assets are really going mainstream institution. It's not proof of concept anymore. They are going on the mainnet and with very impressive amounts. So it's not a concept anymore. It's really happening. And thank you for highlighting that to us, Liam. And looking forward for the next episode with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Casey.
Thank you, Liam.
Thank you. Moving on.
Yes.
Moving on to the big elephant in the room. It's not Dennis. The big elephant is real estate. The real estate sector. Real estate is the largest asset class in the world, 326 trillion. It's huge, but it's also the most inefficient. It's the most emitter of CO2, is the most in energy consumption, and is the least efficient when it comes to transfer. Think about it. When you transfer a stock, the maximum you can wait or bond is 5 days. When you transfer a building, it can take 3 months, sometimes more, and sometimes even not happen at all, because the information that you get is wrong. The data is not accurate. There is asymmetry of information. The sector has been very slow to adopt digital transformation, but it is happening. It is time to take the dust out of the elephant And today I have the pleasure to welcome one of the pioneers in the field, one of the pioneers that created one of the first platform to tokenize buildings in Europe and in the world, even is called Blocksquare. Denis Petrovich, welcome. We are very glad to have you today. If you want to introduce yourself briefly and then introduce Blocksquare.
Sure. Thank you, Mathieu and Casey, for hosting the event and seeing that today we have 0 issues. So this is great to hear. And thanks for having me here. So my name is Denis, and I'm the CEO of Blocksquare. I also am one of the co-founders of a research organization called Fibri, and basically been working on real estate tokenization since 2017. I entered crypto in a way in early 2016 and was really consumed by Ethereum. And we formed the blockchain lab at the time and started researching, how this technology can impact different sectors. And then at this kind of in parallel, I was doing my first real estate investment privately and saw the process firsthand when it comes to making a real estate investment. And we started connecting a bit the dots in that blockchain lab, and the notion of transferring the value of a real estate asset onto tokens started to emerge. And today it's a topic that people talk about, and we have seminars like this, and this is awesome.
Great, fantastic. So when it comes to tokenizing real estate, we believe it's the same for finance. Like, we have to think about the same mechanism in the traditional real estate applied to blockchain. That means enforcing the rights over the asset, guaranteeing ownership over the asset, guaranteeing revenue streams from the asset, financing, transfer, or even access to the building. So can you explain to us what does tokenizing mean for Blocksquare? What are you exactly tokenizing on chain? What are you putting on chain?
I think here, to really understand, tokenization, we first need to understand a couple of other things. And when it comes to real estate, we really need to understand from a legal perspective, what does title ownership really mean? What is that bundle of rights that you receive traditionally when you own a property, whether that's a piece of land, or is it a building, or a part of a building, or is it maybe even an infrastructure facility? So the bundle of rights gives you a couple of these rights, and you have the right to use it, obviously, if you own it.
Correct.
You have the right to change it based on urban planning, confinements. You might be able, if you own a piece of land, you might be able to build something on it or not, if it's not that right is not given to you, right, by the authority. And you have the right to lease it out and charge for it, and you have the right to resell it. And so this bundle of rights is all that you receive when you own a real estate asset. And in financial terms, you can even hand it over as collateral to receive a loan. And that's how most real estate asset acquisitions or purchases, investments are actually being made, through banking partners that enable you to purchase a bulky asset like the real estate property. And when you're tokenizing, you can actually tokenize a portion of these rights. You can define which rights do you want to tokenize.
Yes.
The problem that, back in the day, we didn't have any legal frameworks that would enable the tokenization of title. And so, most people went in the direction of creating SPVs and tokenizing shares of SPVs. And obviously this was not possible anywhere. And then certain jurisdictions that were a bit more forward looking, they opened up this and kind of started enabling this, the transfer and settlement of these rights that derive from owning shares in an SPV. But owning shares in an SPV, in our view, is a complex situation for an investor. And it's also complex when it comes to secondary market liquidity, because essentially there's rules that govern private equities and how those need to be transacted, and who needs to approve when a transaction happens, and who has to legally have the right to purchase it first. So if I own shares in my company and I'm not the only shareholder and I want to sell my shares, there's possibly another shareholder has the privilege or the right to purchase them from me before I sell them to somebody else, right? And so these complexities, we saw that they might be just over the top for blockchain.
Yes.
Because in blockchain, the settlement happens atomically through a smart contract. And what you want to achieve is that the rights that are represented by or are given by a token, whether those rights are native on-chain in digital assets, or they come from off-chain of an off-chain asset, those assets need to settle immediately. That's the whole point.
Right.
So you need to have a contractual structure, a legal structure in place that can enable that. Otherwise, you're not doing much. You're actually, I a lot of times make the comparison to people who were driving around or going around in carriages, and then they invented the car, and then you have some pictures where you have a car with a horse attached to it, because the car's engine should not be turned on. And I think sometimes when we're tokenizing shares in SPVs, I think that's exactly what you're doing.
Right.
And you have
so it's a matter of regulation. It's a matter of regulation, right? If the regulator decides that you can have the same rights on chain than with an SPV, the problem is solved, right?
Yes, and there's jurisdictions where regulators and the laws there are written in a certain way where this can evolve, but there's many jurisdictions where this will never evolve to become public markets for everyone, right?
Yes.
So that settlement of rights will always happen in a very centralized way. And here we basically modeled out a different way of tokenizing the value of a real estate asset.
Right.
And we found out that this model is actually not just more efficient, but it's also much in terms of how it functions and how much it costs, but as well, it allows token holders to be more passive in a way in their investments, and to not be forced to pay for all the legal costs that come with the tokenization of shares in an SPV, which means that kind of our tokenization model is now applicable to a real estate asset that's worth 100K.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is kind of important, because if you put a model that costs 10K or 15K or 5K on top of an asset that's worth 100, then that diminishes the returns in a way, or the value that the investor receives. Because on the other side, there's the supposed liquidity that will happen with tokenization that's just not there yet, and that should be the driver of new value with tokenization.
Right.
But in comparison with real estate, that will take some more time to happen. Right?
How do you deal with the title and the land registry, which is a privilege of the states? How do you connect that? Are there jurisdictions that allow land registry to be moved on chain, for example?
Last year we achieved the first kind of pilot where we executed this, and the kind of the scope of the pilot was how to tokenize a real estate asset without involving a single regulator.
Interesting.
And what we have achieved is the tokenization of a small real estate asset that then was also that tokenization itself was registered or notarized, and a lien was put on the title of the property. And that was done in an EU member country, Slovenia, which is my home country. And we did it there just because we needed to meet with a notary and explain to the notary back and forth in meetings, because they were not, the notary was not really had much experience with blockchain as a technology, honestly, and with tokenization. So we had to kind of really first educate, do a lot of education, and then start searching for a solution. And basically how we achieved this is there's a structuring portion. So the company that owns the real estate asset execute a corporate resolution in which the rights that are being given to each token holder, or whoever holds tokens, and in proportion to how many tokens they hold at any given time. And this corporate resolution is published on IPFS, and that hash is registered in the smart contract, in the token contract, and the token contract is referenced in the corporate resolution. So this is the first step, basically. And this is how we do the tokenizations. We've done tokenizations from 100 million worth of assets almost now.
And how is that enforceable to the public? How do you enforce that? If you have if you want to sell this token on the secondary market, for example, how does the token holder can enforce his rights to the property to the public?
Yeah, so this is a flawed model, right? It's a good first step, but it's a flawed model. And what we need to understand is what we're doing is we're always doing models. We're in a research kind of stage, discovery of the perfect model, right? So this is a way how we were able to start tokenizing real estate in jurisdictions that otherwise, don't support tokenization of shares of an SPV. And at the same time, we were able to cut costs because you don't need to transfer the title of a real estate asset onto an SPV.
Okay.
A lot of times transferring that property incurs a certain taxation. It becomes costly, right? Adds up to the cost. Now, in this model, the rights are enforced through legal recourse. You need to sue the owner, right, the title holder, right?
Yeah.
It's not a pleasant thing. Especially if you invest in an overseas jurisdiction. This is probably not. So you mitigate your risk with diversification, right, as an investor. And on the other side, you have now what we've achieved additionally is we basically executed the tokenization so that we've created a loan that was the loan between the issuer entity, in this case it was Blocksquare, and the owner of the real estate asset. But the loan was not in euros or stablecoin or anything like that, but it was in the tokens of the real estate asset.
So you mean the owner of the property is lending the token or is borrowing the token?
Is the owner of the property is borrowing the token from the issuer.
Okay.
And in that transaction, basically a lien can be put in place. So
on the token,
on the property itself.
On the property
so the tokens,
itself. Okay.
So the tokens, basically that loan is secured with a charge on the real estate asset. So it's backed by the real estate asset. Plus, in that case, also added a contractual penalty should all the provisions or any of the provisions in the corporate resolution be infringed. So there's a callback action that can be executed. And in that callback, so now the owner has the tokens and it sells the tokens to, let's say, 10 or 100 investors, or 1,000, if you will. Now, that loan, that charge is there. If they want to get rid of the charge, they need to buy back the tokens. As soon as they buy back the tokens, the token holders are being repaid. So the outstanding liability towards them is repaid, which means that now these tokens can become proof of payment or receipts in a way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it means that once they are collected or basically bought back, these financial obligations are met. And with smart contracts, you can really streamline that process really efficiently and well. And at that moment, the lien can be removed, and the property owner is now free to kind of transact with the property off chain if they want. So it uses the same principles that banks are using for 100 years, but in just a bit different context. And I think the beauty of it is that we were able to do that without any regulator requiring to enter into this conversation, and without requiring to change any laws, which means that this can be executed in other jurisdictions across Europe, but as far as we know, even in common law countries.
Did you use any legal officer to certify the authenticity of the title, the deed, and you use the same?
Of course. Yeah. Of course, that process is always required, right? You need to do the due diligence process, and what tokenization is actually doing in terms of real estate, it's not changing how the transaction, currently it's not changing how the transaction is conducted off-chain in the real world. That's kind of very traditional. What it's doing is just bringing a set of rights that derive from the title ownership and transferring them to a digital form, which is a token.
Yeah.
Now this token can go in the market and it can create a lot of data. It can create a lot of information. It can create information on pricing of the asset. It can create information on the liquidity of the underlying asset. Because even if you are trading, 5% of the total value of the real estate asset, that's already some kind of signal to the market that if you bring more tokens of the same assets to the market, then the market's going to consume them, right? Because the asset is being seen as a good investment.
Right. I would like to touch a little bit on the Ocean Point protocol, which is a DeFi protocol that you guys have created that allows investors to pool their funds in order to finance real estate assets. So I pulled the website page. Can you take us through the different pools that you have created to create liquidity for real estate?
So Ocean Point is basically what is being built into is a liquidity engine for tokenized real estate. Currently, real estate we tokenize through Blocksquare's kind of tokenization model, and it's in a build-up process. So it's not in its final stage, but we see that we need to get to something like 500 million worth of real estate assets to be able to actually start introducing stake pools. So currently, what we're doing is we're kind of going up, a community around it, and then allowing different ways for people in DeFi to start kind of earning and becoming, gaining governance ownership over the protocol. But the final game of Ocean Point is essentially to enable people that either they're a real estate owner, they can tokenize part of the economic rights that they own of their own asset, and they can use them within DeFi. They can use them as collateral. They can sell them to a protocol to gain some kind of liquidity, and so forth. So that's kind of the game. The end game is for people that own real estate to be able to upload them to basically a blockchain-based infrastructure or protocol.
And when people tokenize their assets, are they issuing your token, like the BST tokens, when they tokenize their real estate asset, and you're creating this?
Basically, each real estate asset has its own smart contract, which is generated through a kind of factory contract, which means each real estate asset has its own token. And in the future, you're going to see thousands or tens of thousands of real estate tokens flood the blockchain, or even more probably, right? And these are there's a long tail of tokens that's going to happen with RWA. And this long tail will have limited liquidity. The smaller the asset, the less liquidity it will have when traded directly. So Ocean Point's goal is to wrap all those assets under kind of a common denominator as an index of sorts, and that index to be able to find liquidity in DeFi in pools on Uniswap and other type of places where liquidity can be brought into the game.
Awesome. Very cool. And also your token is listed, right? You listed your token on several exchanges, the BST token.
Yes, I mean BST is Blocksquare's token, which we the software that we've developed, we've tokenized it through this token, and it gives our partners basically discounts on software licensing, and on the other side, it also kind of gives governance over the protocol and the economic activity that is happening, and you know, it's about to happen once, you know, Ocean Point becomes more mature.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Dennis. Casey, if you have a
No, I think we're doing fine, and thank you very much, Dennis. And we're going to be moving on with our timing as well. And,
amazing, thank you.
And I'm going to be asking, thank you very much, Dennis. And I'm going to be taking it over here now to ask Matt a few questions, because we're going from investment in real estate, assets on platforms, straight on to a platform to aggregate building data. So, Matt, we're going straight on to Magma here, and Magma is issuing digital twin tokens, a dynamic NFT to create a sort of a dynamic real-time twin of the real estate property. Could you go into some detail, just to explain to us why do we need a twin of a real estate property?
Yes, absolutely. So I change my hat to the interview now. So yes, I'm the CEO of Magma, and Magma is doing a little bit different than what Dennis explained. We believe that there are two parts in the tokenization stack, and one part is more aimed to the asset managers, meaning tokenizing of the financial flow of the property. That's what we saw just right now with Dennis. You have the revenues, and you want to distribute the revenues to the token holders. So that's one part. The other part is the tokenization of the building itself, meaning the real estate property. And having done real estate for over 15 years, I went through all the phases of real estate, and I noticed that there is a big hurdle when it comes to data access in real estate, and it can be very costly over the life cycle of a building. If you take a building over its lifetime, 80% of its cost is operating cost. Of course, there is a price you pay for the building, but over the management, you spend a lot of money verifying information, and the loss of information is very costly in real estate. I'm sure we all went through that, whether we are tenant or a real estate owner. If you lose your service provider and you didn't take note of what he has done in the building, then you have to really literally open the walls to know what he has done. And when it comes to operation, that's where you see there is asymmetry of information, and then it leads to error, double checks, and everyone has a different version of the building in his database. So you have a lot of technology that came in the past years in PropTech to allow property management for the tenants, to allow service providers to perform works in the building and keep a digital trace, to allow usage of the buildings, monitor energy performance. But all this data is very scattered. So everyone has a different version of the building. So what we believe is that the building, the same way it has a unique physical address, it needs to have a unique digital address. So it's as simple as that. It's a place where you store what is validated, what you accept as a truth, and then you can use that data to perform contract and operation in the building. So what we create is called the digital twin token. It's the token of the digital twin. And by digital twin, we don't only mean a 3D of the building, but we mean also all the data room. So think of it as a digital data room on steroids, right? It's a digital data room that is connected to blockchain, that you can verify information. So you can have a rent roll that is certified by the tenants and by the property manager. You can have a service that is done in the building with the right information about the equipment, with the right information about the usage, because all that information, we take it, we validate it with a protocol, and then we store it on the blockchain. And once it's on the blockchain, it's available to others to do a contract. So if A and B exist, then C and D can occur. If the window is broken, and you can find a replacement with the exact same within 48 hours and within the budget, you can make a deal directly. You don't have to call me or just basics, but you can do a contract. So that's the principle of Magma.
And could you just go into a little bit of detail here, Matt, as to how is this going to modify real estate management actually?
So right now, if you want to understand why this will work now, whereas a few years ago, it's not only a matter of technology, but it's also a matter of macroeconomics. So let's zoom out a bit to the economic conditions that are occurring right now in the real estate. So for the past years, the asset manager, they had it quite easy to manage buildings. So they were paid on the asset management fees as a percentage of the asset value, and they had the promote fee on the project that they were pursuing on the building. And their only preoccupation was to how much were they going to rent to the next tenant, and maybe how much they were paying for the works, and how much they were borrowing at. And they could borrow at a very interesting cost. The cost of material was cheap, and the economy was booming, so the rents were going high, and so we are in a totally different environment right now. The prices of the real estate are going down, the rents are going up, the interest rates are up, which makes the cost of borrowing higher. The cost of material is higher with the inflation. You have a lot of burden for asset manager in terms of reporting, in terms of environmental, social, and governance obligation. They have to report energy consumption. They have to report CO2 emission. They have to renew the buildings with new systems to make sure the energy consumption is proper. So the burden and the amount of data they need to process is huge. On the other hand, you have the property managers. And the property managers, the way they are paid is by a percentage of the rent they collect. And the rents are going down, so they get less paid, and they have to do a lot of work because they have to deal with the service provider, they have to deal with the tenants, and they have to collect a lot of information, which again is scattered. So the burden is very high on their shoulders. And now the asset manager needs a lot of information from them. And the solution to that is a technology that can assure the certification of the data, so you don't have the double spending of verifying everything, and that assure that these data sets can be used by other stakeholders, and that also that this data is going to improve the value of the building. So we believe that a new model needs to come where the property manager work is more valued, and the asset manager is some sort of paying a little bit for the data management, and the property manager needs to use tools like Magma to aggregate data and to be able to report this data back to the asset manager.
So your model is very, very close to what Michael Clark was speaking about in the very beginning about data and value.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. And so we believe that there is the value of the real estate and the value of the data in the real estate, like how is the data organized and what it will be used for and for what price. So that's a complete new business around the data value in real estate.
So the two are going to be correlated in some way, Matt?
Totally. We can imagine a set where the asset manager is promoting a project and is telling his investors, well, see, I give you full transparency. You can access the building. You can even see it in 3D. And you can see who is involved, the timeline, the budget, where the money is going, the energy consumption. And the more the building becomes compliant and energy positive and provide new services, the more digital value it produces.
Okay, so Magma also has a utility token, and you use token rewards. So token rewards. Could you explain how the model and how this can become virtuous for all the stakeholders?
Yeah. So what we do, we believe that the building is an entity in itself. So it can be programmed. And so we create a wallet for the building. So the building now has a wallet and it can transact. And so you can program the wallet to pay for data. You say, I want to know the equipment reference. So you program the wallet. When you receive that information, a reward is paid to the tenant that provide the information, or to the service provider that provide the information, or to the BIM manager or the architect that will work in the BIM model. So there is a reward system for data. And so that's how we incentivize people, because otherwise people won't put data. You can force them, but it won't work. The only way to incentivize people is by rewarding them.
And so by incentivizing them, you're getting quality, and you're also controlling the quality of the information that's in the digital twin.
Correct. And the goal of that is to have a computable data. For example, if you give me a PDF, you are paid search. If you give me an Excel file, it's a little bit better because it's computable. If you input it directly into a JSON file, it's even better because I can now plug it to a computer and do some algorithm and try to optimize the data.
And has Magma already done a proof of concept with an actual building? Could you give us some detail into that?
Yes, so we did our first building near the Champs-Élysées in Paris. It's an office building that so the platform is not fully built yet. To be completely transparent, we have built now the data room base of the platform, so which is called the Genesis level, which is all the documentation about the building. And so we did one building that we did 33% of the level 0 completed. That means 33% of the information that we could out of the 25 documents that we could get was done. So we are going to come again and improve the level of information that we have. And then we are going to start, implementing the viewer of the 3D model. So we will start working with the structure of the building, architectural elements, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, and the furnitures. So it's a step-by-step process. So we did one. The owner is giving us another building. We are talking to several big institutions to do proof of concept. Very large real estate companies that own hundreds, if not thousands, of buildings. And so, yes, we have like a coming up pipe that is pretty interesting, yes.
How would you say, Matt, that your Magma and your digital twin could be complementary for real-world asset tokenization and real estate tokenization?
Yes.
So the things that we've heard to date, how could this be complementary?
Yeah, it's really the building part of the tokenization. So it will provide transparency on the building part, and that will give the asset manager verified, certified data that can influence the net asset value of the building. So if you can know that there something happened in the building, something was broken that will require some work, and you can know how much it's going to cost you, you can input that directly into the price of the token. So if you imagine the building price trading like a token on an exchange, you can imagine the influence that will external things will have on the asset that will influence the price of the token. So it's really
all the things you spoke about, like real time and updated information. This is what you are giving: real time and updated information at any point in time on the real estate property.
Correct. And it doesn't have to be very high tech at the beginning. We believe every building should have a digital twin token, but it can be low tech at the beginning, very low tech. A rectangle with information. At least you can geolocate it, and then when you go into it, you can visit and you can click on items. It gives you information, and this information can be updated over time. It doesn't have to be full high-tech, computing, very high compute. It can be done, gradually.
Over time and enriched, so it becomes more valuable with time.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
Listen, that's fascinating. You learn from the digital twin industry that it's already like 19 billion going up to, I think, almost 100 billion by 2028. So this is a huge market.
Yes.
So thank you very much, Matt. I think we've gone through quite a bit of things and finished the real estate tokenization part. So I think we're going to inverse our
Our
chairs
hats,
right
okay?
now, or hats.
So yeah, I give you the hat of Logion, the Logion hat. All right. Yes, yes, because Casey is also a co-founder of Logion, and Magma work with Logion, because in real estate you have a lot of documents, and those documents sometimes they need to be certified. And as we said earlier, there is the on-chain world and the off-chain world. And in the off-chain world, you have officers, you have legal officers that are able to certify these documents. And Logion is about certifying documents through a network of legal officers. Can you explain what is Logion?
Thank you, Matt. So just so we can get one step back, the token, as we've always said, is always connected to some type of rights. Denis spoke about it. Michael Clark spoke about it in the very beginning. So the token is linked to some sort of connected rights. This link to the connected rights is something that's problematic in this whole tokenization sphere. And so the idea of how do you link or embed rights and obligations with the token, this is what the protocol Logion does. So we're doing two things, that is embedding the rights and the obligations and linking it to the token. I can explain that in a few minutes. And then the second thing we'll be doing is also certifying. Matt was saying that he has in his digital model, so he's bringing qualified information. And sometimes you need to certify and authenticate information in relation to the real estate, property, or token. And how are you going to certify that information? You're going to certify it because you're linking an identity, so a source or provenance, and a quality because it's a surveyor, it's a accredited RICS, or it's a notary public, it's a lawyer, whatever, somebody who's done the act. So he's qualifying that information as well that he's bringing on chain. So we do both the idea of certifying and bringing legal grade information on chain and also bringing a legal framework around the token. So that's basically what we're doing. Now we're doing it through, Matt, you said, a network of legal officers. So what is this network of legal officers? They're the ones that are signing the information on chain and bringing the information on chain. They have the status of legal officers. Typically in France, this would be like what we call today a commissaire de justice, formerly huissier de justice. They have a legal status under law and are recognized by the state as being able to do two things, both to qualify a data gathering process as well, to be able to say it is compliant with the rules of data gathering in relation to the law and evidence. That is essential. It's essential because if two parties want to be sure about what actually happened, they would need to be able to qualify that information. So this is where the legal officer comes in, and it goes all the way up, up, up. If you all get to any type of difficulty later on in arbitration, mediation, all the way up to the courts, you can get legal grade information, starting from reading it on the certificate all the way up to the end if you need to get something authenticated. So this is the network of legal officers. They bring in their legal status, they bring in their own responsibility as state officers. So you have that whole quality of neutrality and independence that's coming on to the quality of information that's coming on chain. And we have a second as well way in which information is coming on chain. Those are through what we call verified issuers. And verified issuers are people like me. I'm a lawyer. So typically, I would be able to qualify information with regard to a contract that I have done because I am in the Web3 transaction in some way, either that I have drafted the contract or whatever. And so I will, as an accessory to the work I have done, I will then be able to qualify it on chain, on the platform, and bring that information that will then come into the lock. So here, this is a little part about the embedding that I wanted to explain. So what we're doing is, when you come onto the platform, you open a digital folder. Once you've got your ID and QIC done, you come into the, you can put up the certificates. You come into the the platform, you open up a digital folder, you're going to load up your documents, your land registry documents, your auditing documents, any information that you have that gives you updated information as to the value of the property, for example. And from that, all that information is going to be compiled within your digital file. When the issuer considers that he has brought all the monetary information he needs, he could even bring other information that he could then consider is confidential, that is not seen by others. The lock will be closed, and this lock can then be read on the certificate that you're seeing on the left. This is what the certificate looks like. Of course, it's not a paper document. Obviously, we're speaking about blockchain, so it's something that's read online. Yeah. And the information that you can get is encrypted for the information that is considered to be encrypted and that can be read and visible for other information. So all those, that's very protective of several different things. Privacy, first of all, we spoke about with Michael in the beginning. Some things need to be confidential, and we mustn't forget that the MiCA regulation also imposes on us in Europe certain obligations in terms of confidentiality as well. And then as well, other information will not be visible. And then you can also protect other information, such as protected information, confidential information. So that the information, that what we're seeing here, the certificate is what it looks like. At the top on the left, I'm not sure if you're seeing it very well. There's a token gated access. Then you have in the middle side, the information that comes online with regard to the rights. And then the bottom line, what we're showing is how it's embedded. It is that the metadata in relation to the certificate is linked to the token. So that's how, even though the token will move, you can always have that link to come online and get that ready information that is necessary with regard to the token. So that's what we're doing. I mean, it's in a nutshell, but I don't know if you have any other questions.
Can you erase the information once it's recorded? Like, is it possible for the person to retract the information?
Retract. So in a lock, normally, like any blockchain, we would say that you can't modify what we call mutability. Right. Okay, so you can't modify, but you can update information, which is very important.
Okay.
Retract. Now, what we want to say is that when you open a lock, before it is closed, there is a timing within which you can remove, add, and change. So this is something that is a dynamic period, but there is a point in time when you actually lock that information that can no longer be altered. For it to be altered afterwards, you would then update it, and this is through another feature which we call a token record. So typically, for example, in real estate tokenization, if you have regular reports concerning the value, the revenue stream that has come with regard to, if you're doing revenue royalties or things like that, you would then want to have a token record with regard to what has been the revenue made from the building. And this can be done through a token record that comes subsequently and that can be read as well on the certificate.
And can you compartment the information that you provide? Like, can you share only certain part of the information?
Exactly. So say, for example, for the tokenization project, some information is mandatory under the compliance rules. That information must absolutely be within, and that information should be able to be read by the token holder. And let's say there's other information that, for example, typically within a property deed, there may be information that is confidential that may not need to be read by others, and that can be then not visible. So there is all that different layering that we have as well within the way in which certificate can be read.
Awesome. Very cool. So you are really the link between the off-chain world and the on-chain world when it comes to documents.
The link between off-chain, the on-chain, and the link as well between the legal, even though we spoke about it a lot today, but it is so important, and enforcing the token. How do you enforce? What we're trying to do is that you get that, you get your rights, and they are transparent at the token level. So that is something that is essential as well for enforcement.
Right.
Okay, so I think we went through quite a lot of things today, and now we've come to not too bad at 6:08 to come and give out. So just so everybody would know, Matt, before you go into the last part and the last session, which is the actual current and future trends. David Servet had to leave us before, so he will come back at another conversation. Okay, so that was XRPL Commons.
Okay.
So he said to say sorry here because he had to leave for an urgency, but he will be back on another conversation.
Okay.
So we're just going straight on to current and future market trends. Matt.
Yes, yes. So I don't know who from the speakers where we still have right now. I think they all left.
Dennis is here.
Dennis is here. So I want to touch a little bit on and Michael is here as well. Michael is here. Cool. So market perspective. So we saw with the ETF and the macroeconomic perspective again is really pushing the Bitcoin narrative as an edge to inflation and debasement of the currencies. And so that's why we now have people like Larry Fink explaining to us that this is a safe haven to go to blockchain and to cryptocurrencies, which is pretty amazing. And we saw a big inflow of cash into the market since the creation of these ETFs. So those ETFs are a tradable instrument that represent another asset, which in our case is the Bitcoin. So we see a huge inflow in the cryptocurrency. So I would like to have your take, maybe Dennis, on the market. How do you see this playing for us as an ecosystem? Do you see the next year being the years of tokenization and the flow of money? Is it going to come to us?
I need to say something that is speaking to us, right? I need to be really, yeah, this is really good. I'm always skeptical when there's this, the bigger institutions coming in. There's less room for the innovators as well because there's more competition, and they usually start bringing additional regulation to the market, which makes it harder and harder for smaller players, 20, 30 man team. People teams to move around. So I think it's an indication that we definitely need to move even faster.
Right.
Because at the same time, it's it can be I perceive it as my vision 6 years ago was right. So as also somebody interested in the future, it's and a person. It's fine. It's great to be right. So that's how I see it.
Yeah. So it's a bit troubling as well. I think that to see that those big institutions are a bit coming over this market where they were all reluctant to come in, and now we see the Web3 is like full of big institutions like Citibank, HSBC, Goldman Sachs, BlackRock. So it's a little bit contrary to the philosophy of the decentralized world that was created after the crisis of 2008 to avoid the banking centralization. So it's a bit difficult to see this happening. But on the other hand, we need liquidity, and the money has to come from somewhere. So the money right now is in the centralized world. I would say we need as innovators, to fight and build the solutions that will get that flow and keep our philosophy straight to continue the fight for decentralization. At least I speak for myself, but I think for me, decentralization is really important in the world we live in. And so that's my take on it. Michael, what's your take on the current state of the market for crypto?
It is quite funny because I gotta be careful because I work for a company, but I do. Yes. I'm a bit like you. I look at it with quite some humor because the same companies that were actually against the fundamental principles of crypto have now just suddenly decided, well, now it's actually quite a good idea. And what they're really doing, though, is they're just using the infrastructure. They're not actually using the principles. They're just piggybacking on the infrastructure. And the irony is the same mindset of fiat is still actually powering using the currencies at the same purpose. So I'm always skeptical when people start jumping in of an asset that 4 years ago they said was completely worthless and anybody shouldn't invest in it. And now it's suddenly become the flavor of the month. Like Dennis, I think when I worked in JP Morgan, I think in 2014, I wrote to Jamie Dimon and said to him, if we replace the word trade for data and asset, could JP Morgan become a digital asset manager? All those years later, that's suddenly become true, right? Because if you follow the dots, that's where the world is going. I think the only thing that big companies can probably help with is probably improving the customer experience with wallets today and some of the Web3 technologies. Because actually that's still a big problem with the amount of Bitcoin that's actually lost in the market, which is like about 20% of the overall makeup of Bitcoin, and maybe even higher actually. So I think big tech can help in terms of normalizing that, but I think where the Web3 community play a role is to keep the principles that was built in the first place. Because if we're not really careful, what's actually happening in the Web3 world now is we're replaying the Web2 world in Web3. So take AI, for instance, is now operated by a centralized company called OpenAI, and that's pretty much how Google started, right? So we're very quickly following the same blueprint and pattern. So I think we have an opportunity to sort of make sure those principles of what made Web3 a powerful force and what built communities, because it was community that built it. So we can't lose the ethos of community, because the irony is the next generation coming to, as I said earlier, spend their life in community. That's how they live. They're in Roblox, they're in all these environments. So I think we won't lose community. I think we've got to be careful as we just don't lose the ethos of what's being defined. But it's a real difficult paradox, because we need liquidity for an ecosystem to thrive, but at the same time we can't lose the principles. And I don't think we will, because I think the people who were born into Web3 and DeFi and others are the ones that are forcing the principle change. But I think there's a long way to go. But it is an interesting shift of the guard, I think, based on people's previous perspectives and positions.
Right. And like you say, I think they are using the infrastructure, and that's what we are witnessing right now, is that the rails of this new financial infrastructure are being built on blockchain. You see big institutions like Franklin Templeton, all the big names, they are issuing funds on blockchain now. Yesterday it was BlackRock for 100 million, a new fund. So they want to use the rails of this new technology, and we need to keep it decentralized. As long as it stays decentralized, I have no problem of big institutions coming in, as long as they don't control the network. Like if you see a Bitcoin ETF that has the customers, because Larry Fink, what he says is that, okay, Bitcoin now is a wonderful asset. It's protecting you against inflation. It's the hedge against currency risk. But what he's doing for his customer is he's having them invest in a fiat-denominated instrument, and him as BlackRock buying directly what's protecting him from inflation. But his clients are buying the ETF in dollar-denominated amount. So I think it's quite contradictory. But and also in the end, we will end up with BlackRock owning a lot of the supply. So at what point it becomes, dangerous for the decentralization of the network? So this is a balance that we need to really be careful with, and
but it all comes back to the ownership of the asset, right? So everything leads you back to the digital asset and its ownership and how it's used. Yes, so today, what we're describing is it being used in exactly the same way as the last 40 years. It's just now wrapped in a different asset and just conveniently got a name. That's where the ownership comes in, and a lot of things we've talked about today in terms of certifying, the way we think about storing it, and everything else in between. That's why it's so important. But no, you're right. There's so much to think about and do, and that's why, like I literally say, I'm always skeptical when big companies start to jump into this space, because it's never for the principles of definition. It's either to stay relevant or to cut costs, because blockchain, don't forget, gets rid of all the reconciliation services that power a lot of these big corporates today and have been an overhead for probably the last 20, 30 years, right?
Right.
So
Yes. 2/3 of the cost of a transaction is back office operation, 2/3 of the cost. So if they can eliminate that.
Matt, maybe Colin or anybody would like to share their own insights on the current state of the market, what
Yes,
they
please,
think,
guys.
and because now you can unmute your microphones and speak. I see Colin was saying here that big companies will be able to leverage the efficiency gains better than anyone, and they will certainly be a big part of this. I don't know if Colin, you want to develop that or not, or if there's anybody else. Okay. Sorry about that, Colin. Next time. Okay.
Okay.
Next time have you in. I don't know if there's anybody. This is the moment.
If you want to share your views on the market outlook. Anyone? No? All right. Okay, well, I think we're gonna wrap it up here. It was really an exciting conversation. I really look forward for the next episode. We are gonna look at all your comments, and maybe we're gonna tailor make the next one with the topics of interest. Thank you so much, guys. Michael, Dennis, Casey.
It was wonderful. It was really wonderful having you all. I mean, it was dynamic. I have to say, it was dynamic and very rich. And I'm really looking forward to the next one already. Thank you, Matt.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Matt.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
You see,
Bye-bye.
Thank you.